A Hunger Artist by Franz Kafka. In the great cities of Europe, in a time not long ago, there was a peculiar kind of spectacle that drew vast crowds. It was not a circus with acrobats, nor a theater of grand actors, nor even the performances of exotic animals brought from far lands. It was something stranger, quieter, and yet, for a time, more fascinating than any of those things. It was the art of fasting. And among the practitioners of this strange art, none was more famous, more revered, and more mysterious than the hunger artist. He was a man who devoted his entire life to the act of fasting, turning what others might see as suffering into what he declared was art. He would sit inside a small cage, thin and pale, watched day and night by hired guards and by endless streams of curious spectators. For days, for weeks, sometimes for over 40 days, he would eat nothing. Nothing but water passed his lips. And people came from every corner of the city to gaze upon him, to marvel at his endurance, to whisper about his dedication, to test whether such a thing was even possible. For him, this was no mere performance. It was a calling. He believed, deep in his bones, that fasting was the truest expression of his being. To deny himself food was, paradoxically, the only way he felt alive. The golden days. In those early years, the hunger artist was celebrated like a star. Children were lifted onto shoulders so they could see him. Ladies in fine dresses pressed close to the bars of the cage to stare at his hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. Gentlemen stroked their beards and debated whether it was real or some clever trick. And every day, the newspapers printed small updates: the artist has reached his 30th day without food, or doctors confirm his health remains astonishing despite his fast. Inside the cage, the hunger artist sat silently on his straw, nodding politely, sometimes answering questions in a weak but steady voice. Guards were stationed nearby, not to protect him from danger, but to assure the audience that no secret food was being slipped to him. And of course, the artist needed no such protection, he despised the very thought of eating. But there was a strange rule that always frustrated him: never was he allowed to fast beyond 40 days. After 40 days, the managers of the spectacle insisted he must end the performance, whether he wished it or not. They would bring him a carefully prepared meal, encourage him to take a few bites, and lead him out of the cage with triumphant music as the crowd applauded. The artist hated those moments. He felt cheated. He wanted to go further, to break all limits, to show the world that his body could endure far more than 40 days. But the managers cared only for spectacle. They said the audience lost interest after that point, that people grew restless, that no one wanted to see a man fading into death. And so, the hunger artist would end his fast unwillingly, humiliated, frustrated, and convinced that his greatest art remained unseen. The decline. But fashions change. What once drew great crowds began to feel, to the public, like an old curiosity. People wanted faster thrills, louder entertainments, new wonders. The quiet art of fasting lost its magic. Where once the hunger artist had been adored, now his cage was placed in the corner of a traveling fair, alongside the noise of barkers, jugglers, clowns, and wild animals. No one came specifically to see him anymore. Children ran past without stopping. Adults barely glanced his way. The artist still fasted, still held to his discipline with iron will. But now, there were no guards to assure the public of his honesty, none were needed, for so few cared whether he cheated or not. He sat alone, pale and skeletal, ignored. Even the managers who once arranged his grand performances abandoned him. Yet, strangely, this neglect gave him the freedom he had always wanted. At last, no one forced him to stop at 40 days. At last, he could fast as long as his strength held out. Day after day, week after week, month after month, he sat in silence, consumed by his art. He had finally achieved what he dreamed of, the chance to fast without limit, without interruption, without applause. And yet, there was no triumph. There was only emptiness. The forgotten artist. The days stretched on. The fair bustled with noise, with music, with the laughter of children. But at the edge of it all, the hunger artist's cage gathered dust. Few even realized he was still there. Passers-by might see him curled on the straw, so thin that he seemed hardly more than a shadow, and think nothing of it. The attendants of the fair hardly noticed him either. He became part of the scenery like an old forgotten banner, or a broken piece of equipment that no one bothered to remove. He fasted and fasted, beyond all human record, beyond anything he had ever imagined. But no one marked the days anymore. No one counted. No one cared. The last words. And then, at last, one day, the attendants noticed something strange. The cage seemed too quiet. They opened it and found the hunger artist lying motionless, his body frail as paper, his breath shallow, his eyes already glazed with the shadow of death. Startled, they called for help, but it was too late. With what little strength remained, the hunger artist whispered. His voice was so weak they had to bend close to hear him. He said, "I have always wanted you to admire my fasting. But you should not. You should not admire me. Do you know why I fasted? Because I could not find food I liked. If I had found it, believe me, I would have eaten like you, just like you all. But I never found it. That is all." And with those words, the hunger artist gave his last breath. The aftermath. The attendants cleared away the straw. They carried out his tiny, lifeless body, and in his place, they put something new, a young, strong panther, pacing in the cage with fire in its eyes. The panther ate with joy, tore into raw meat, roared with power. Crowds gathered immediately. People pressed close, thrilled by the energy, the vitality, the sheer force of life on display. No one remembered the hunger artist anymore. No one mourned. His art was forgotten, his obsession buried in silence, replaced by something more entertaining. Closing reflection. And so ends the tale of the hunger artist. He was a man who dedicated his life to his art, who gave up everything, even his own existence, to remain true to what he believed was his purpose. Yet in the end, he died unrecognized, misunderstood, and replaced by a creature that lived with passion and appetite. Was he a martyr of art? A symbol of the alienated soul, misunderstood by society? Or simply a man consumed by emptiness, unable to find joy in life? That is for us, the listeners, to decide. But one truth remains: the hunger artist sought beauty in suffering, and in his lonely death, he revealed the cruel irony of the world, that sometimes, the greatest devotion, the deepest sacrifice, can vanish without applause, forgotten in the noise of the crowd.